Duane Hanson is known for his super realism when it comes to sculpture, and he had a really interesting technique. What he does is he creates a mold using plaster and other materials, usually taking castings from live models. Then he pieces these together to create basically a mold, and eventually he will fill that mold with resin, basically plastic, airbrush it, and create these hyper-realistic figures. Now, you might be wondering, why would an artist want to be looking at these figures? After all, none of them are doing anything that's particularly impressive or particularly interesting. But that's the key. In his case, he's trying to get us to understand and explore an element that we typically don't. Think of television, for example. How often do we look at the working class or the lower middle class? We really don't. We tend to ignore them. They live in a sense of almost invisibility, especially to the people who are typically your clients and viewers in art galleries, people who are in the upper middle class, etc. So, what he is doing is really capturing some of the ideas of realism, which we saw in the 19th century, capturing sort of the reality of the day, but he's also capturing some of that loneliness, some of that anonymity that we see in pieces like Third Class Carriage back in the 19th century. So, let's look at one of his pieces, Supermarket Shopper. Now, this piece is really kind of remarkable in that it doesn't seem to say anything at first. It would appear to be nothing more than exercise in creating hyperrealism. Look at how amazing I can create something and how realistic it can truly be. And it is. I mean, we've got the boxes, we've got the woman, we've got the flesh tones. Everything seems to work out, but yet you go a little bit deeper. See, it's not entirely about realism. In fact, he's playing off of many of the pop art ideas. He's taken things and put them in the cart that would have spoken to the consumer at the time the piece was done. And he's created a female form that is pretty average. What you might see in the grocery store, he's created an image of ubiquity, very similar to Andy Warhol and his green Coca-Cola bottles. So, similar ideas, different ways of getting to it. When we look at it up close, we see a lot of detail going into it, spectacular forms, but it, of course, goes beyond that. And there's some element of mockery. And we always tend to, as a society, mock members of the lower class. It's not the right thing to do, but it's what tends to happen. Think of sitcoms where we have lower class people in the sitcom. They're always making fun of themselves in some way, because if they showed us the reality, we might be so horrified that, well, we'd turn it off. And yet, let's go deeper. Let's look at the reality here. As we look at Hanson's Supermarket Shopper, he talks about why he has chosen this subject. He says, quote, "The subject matter that I like best deals with the familiar, lower and middle class American types of today. To me, the resignation, emptiness, and loneliness of their existence captures the true reality of these people. I want to achieve a certain tough realism which speaks to the fascinating idiosyncrasies of our time." Now, of course, this is 1970. So, for example, you see the cigarette hanging out of her mouth in a store. That's not something that's going to happen today. Of course, it's probably illegal in every state. But yet there's a universal element to it. If you updated her clothes and updated the things in the cart, you would still have a universal element to it, something that we can all read into. And that's what makes this so powerful. It speaks to us today. We're trying to assign meaning and thought, and it's almost horrifying Because especially as a young person looking at, you look at and you see this person who maybe has given up or has this very depressing existence as we might see it. Going to work, coming home, buying groceries, never really doing that spectacular thing on TV that we all dream of. And there is the beauty of it. We can put ourselves in her position, almost like some of the Greek Hellenistic sculptures, the defeated boxer, for example. And yet, we can look at it and explore it from so many different angles, the psychology, the form. And we can put ourselves in her position. It might be horrifying, it might be something comforting, but it speaks to the human condition in a way that so many pieces can't, because of that element of universality.